Hi, and welcome to another prayer meeting with Cottondale. My name's Chad, and it's a privilege to be with you this evening. Hopefully, you enjoyed last week. That was kind of a doozy, and but I hope it was helpful to you. This week is going to be maybe even a little more difficult in that regard, but we're going to do the best we can. There's a lot here. So there's no way I could even begin to try to go through it in any detail. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about chapters 10 and 11 together, and when you read them, you'll understand why. Like I said, I'm not going to go through a lot of detail, but the most important thing is that despite lots of the obscure historical things that are kind of difficult to pin down, there are important principles and I think lessons that we can draw from these passages, and then we can make them our prayer to God, which is what we want to do tonight. And so, chapter 10 and 11 together are both pretty long, so we won't waste any more time on that. Just go ahead and hit the pause button and read both chapters 10 and 11, and when you're done, pick back up with me. All right, so maybe your mind is blown, maybe it's not, but I'm gonna erase my messing around from earlier. Okay, so we're just gonna begin by talking about chapter 10, verse 9. Okay, it says, Then I heard. Where's my highlighter? Okay. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep, with my face to the ground. And behold, a hand touched me, and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up, trembling. Then he said to me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand, and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. Okay, so you probably figured out that we're going to do 10 and 11 together, because really chapter 10 is just setting up the vision and the prophecy that Daniel will receive in chapter 11. But I thought this section is important and contains some important lessons for us to think about. Okay, so we see here that that Daniel, he when he encounters this this angelic being, I mean, he he says he fell on his face with a deep sleep. I mean, it's almost like he passed out. I mean, like he blacked out, and it clues us in a little bit to what it would be like to encounter the divine. I mean, this isn't God we're talking about. This is just an angel, and he just blacks out basically because of the glory of this creature. Okay, and so to me, it communicates probably how little we really respect, the glory of God and of spiritual realities that are most of the time stand behind things. We don't see them directly, but when Daniel is exposed directly to this angelic being, I mean, it literally makes him black out. Okay, it's the holiness and glory of God. It's like Moses, where God said, "You can't even see me, or you'll die." Right. But what we see here is that this angel touched him, and every time he touched him, Daniel got a little bit stronger. And so that is evidence of, it's a pointer to the fact that God's grace we can't on our own, but God's grace makes us sufficient, empowers us, enables us to stand before him. And it's only he that can do that, right? But what I really wanted to look at was these couple verses here. It says, "O Daniel, man greatly loved." Now that's amazing, isn't it? Have you ever read that and just kind of been blown away? Here's Daniel, and this angel comes up to him and tells him that he is greatly loved. Now, Daniel is one of the most remarkable people in the Bible. He certainly had his faults, no doubt. But what is fascinating about Daniel is in other of the great biblical heroes, we learn about their faults, even Abraham and David, clearly, Solomon. They were great men, but we learn from the Bible some of the great faults that they had. We know Daniel had faults, but what's interesting is that in the book of Daniel, we don't really learn about any of them. He is really presented to us as a remarkably faithful man. And he trusted the Lord, and that was the basis of or evidence, maybe we could say, of the great love with which God loved him. And it's just remarkable to me that this angel would refer to him in that way. I'm not aware of another place in the Bible where somebody's referred to quite this way, except for Jesus. Oh man, greatly loved. How would you like to hear those words from God? He says, "Understand that I speak to you, and I stand upright, and I've been sent to you." And when he spoke in this word to me, he stood up trembling. So the word gave him strength. And then he said, "Fear not, from the first day you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God. Your words have been heard, and I've come to you because of your words." This is what I really want us to look at here. Look at what Daniel did. Okay? He set his heart to understand and humbled himself before God. And because he did that, what happened? His words were heard, and God sent an angel to do what? To make him understand, right? That he comes to receive this vision. Okay? And so I just want you to think about this for a second. Daniel humbled himself before God, and he set his heart to understand. And because he did that, what did God do? God, supernaturally in this case, heard his pleas and answered them, and to give him understanding. And of course, this should be a huge encouragement to us as followers of Jesus Christ, right? That if we will humble ourselves before God, and if we will set our heart to understand him, to understand his word, then he will do what? Then he'll hear our pleas for those things, and he will work however he would like to work. He will make it so that we have what we desire. That is understanding about God, about things, about reality. Okay, those things are gifts from God. God sees when we're humbly dependent on him for those gifts. We don't presume to be able to achieve them on our own. And when we humble ourselves and set our heart on them, God so often is pleased to answer. And so, even like this year, when we're thinking about in our church going deeper in 2021, this would be a great verse to set to memory as you study your Bible and as you read your Bible day in and day out. That if you set your heart to understand and you humble yourself before the Lord He'll teach you. He'll show you. He will hear those prayers, and he will, who knows, he may send an angel. You probably might not have a vision, but what we learn from this is that there is angelic activity, right? He talks about the Prince of Persia here later on, okay? That's probably referring to an angel, right? And so there's angelic activity behind there's spiritual realities behind the physical outplaying of human history. And so it's well within the realm of possibility that when we pray things like that, we might not see an angel, but who knows? God may in some way send an angel and work things to help us to understand his word, which is amazing if you think about it. I mean, it's incredible if you think about it, but that's just how God works. We don't always see it. We don't always understand it. It's hard to know always for sure what's going on, but we do know that when we set our heart to know God and to understand his word, and when we humble ourselves before him, he is pleased to grant us light, to grant us sight, to grant us insight and understanding in revelation. And so this would be a great challenge for us this evening, is to ask God to make us like this, and for us to make the conscious decision to say, I'm going to set my heart to know God, to know His Word, to understand what's going on in the world and how to best think about it from a biblical perspective. And if we set our heart on that, God will give us understanding. Okay, and then he goes on and talks about the Prince of Persia. Okay, and another important thing here is that the vision is for days yet to come. And so this kind of helps set up this vision that Daniel's going to, this prophecy that Daniel's going to experience here. That it's going to be in the future. Okay, so that's just important to grasp there. So some prayer points here. Pray for a heart that is set to understand. Pray that God would be pleased to illuminate you in understanding the spiritual realities behind the world. I mean, I really can't think of I can hardly think of a more important thing than to set our heart to know God, to understand God. And even today, the issues and the complexities of things going on in the world, there's lots of fear and anxiety because there's so many things we feel like we don't know and we don't understand. And there are many things we might never understand, but we can understand the most important things. And when we acknowledge our human weakness and understanding, but express that desire to God and commit our understanding to Him that we might use it to serve Him and honor Him and glorify Him, I believe God will be pleased to hear those pleas and grant us understanding. And so maybe you're struggling in scripture reading and the light hasn't come on yet. Well, you have to want it. Set your heart to understand. Humble yourself before God. Ask Him, and then just see what He'll do in showing His truth to you. So take some time and pray about that. And then pray against the spiritual forces of evil in the world. Pray that God would accomplish His good purposes for His people in the spiritual realm. What we saw in the Prince of Persia and things like that is that there are spiritual realities even behind nations. Okay, we know very little about how that all works, but there's no doubt that there are spiritual realities and forces at play that affect our physical reality and affect human history, but we're ignorant of them. We can't see them, but they're there. And so, and what we saw is that Daniel's prayer actually had something to do with all that, right? When in Daniel's praying to God, God sent one of these angels to reveal to him what's going on, the outplay of warring nations and human history. Okay? And so why not pray that whatever is going on in the spiritual realm, that God would work it, would bless His people, would accomplish His good purposes in the world. I mean, we don't usually think about praying like that, but I think it's something worth praying about from our passage tonight. So why not take some time and kind of walk through these things, and then we'll move on to the next one when you're done. All right, we're now going to jump way over to near the end of chapter 11, okay, verse 31. It says, "Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time." Okay. So when we're looking at this section here and all throughout chapter 11, it would be really difficult for me to go through all that, and I'm not an expert on it by any means. But if you have a good study Bible, I've mentioned some of those before, the ESV study Bible, the NIV study Bible, the CSB study Bible are some good ones. There's many other good study Bibles out there. Or if you're really interested, you can pick up a commentary. Make sure you pick up a good one. But and there's some other good resources out there. I'll mention one just in case you're interested. It's called preceptaustin.org. Preceptaustin.org. This is where somebody, I don't know who, has collected a lot of commentary resources that most of them are pretty good, and he's put them all in one place. And so if you're just looking to go a little bit deeper and you're not really sure where to go, this is actually a good place to go. There's really more than you can absorb there, but it's a good place. It's free. preceptaustin.org. But my point in all that is that if you read these things, they'll give you some insight into what's going on in chapter 11. The biggest thing you need to know is this, is that the things that are predicted in chapter 11 have to do with what ends up taking place. There's lots of overlap with some of the vision that Daniel has had already, okay? That after he's talking about the kings of Persia, the last king that he's talking about is probably Xerxes, okay, who is one of the greatest and the height of the Persian kingdom, probably in the empire. He's extremely wealthy, and he actually tried to invade Greece with a huge, massive army. But in spite of that, he was actually repelled. Greece repelled him and defeated him in 2 major battles, and that's part of the reason why later Alexander the Great was so fierce and zealous to go back and conquer Babylon and Persia, conquer Persia. Okay, and so Alexander the Great is like the great king, is often referred to, because he, at a young age, just decimated his enemies. But he died very young, at the age of like 32 or 33, from some kind of illness. Okay, and then his kingdom was divided up. There were some warring factions among his generals, but then eventually it got divided up into 4 main parts. Okay, and then the rest of chapter 11 deals with 2 of those divisions of the Greek Empire. Okay, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The Ptolemies were ruled from Egypt, okay, and the Seleucids ruled from Syria. Okay, so Syria's up here, then you have Israel, and then you have Egypt down here. Okay, so the reason why it talks about those 2 kingdoms is because those 2 kingdoms were at war with one another, and guess who was right in the middle? Israel. Okay, so Daniel's receiving this vision of what's going to happen to his nation during this intervening period before Jesus comes, okay, as it plays out primarily between these 2 rival kingdoms just warring against each other, and Israel being caught in the middle, okay, and so that's and again, so if you read a good study Bible or something like that, or a commentary, what's remarkable is how much detail is in chapter 11 as you read, but how unbelievably accurate that it is. I mean, it's just unbelievable how accurate it is about the very complex history that took place during that time period. Okay, it's pretty remarkable. Okay, and so this section that we read here almost certainly refers to Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who was a king of the Seleucid Empire, which was from Syria on the north side of Israel, the king from the north. Okay, and he was probably a little bit crazy. Okay, in fact, that's what some people called him, that he was a madman. Okay, he was very good at manipulation and political intrigue. Okay, and he also really wanted to unite his empire under his kingdom under Greek culture and religion, and of course that was a problem for the Jews, right? Because he strongly wanted his kingdom to be united under the Greek culture and pagan worship, and that included the Jews. Okay, so you can imagine the problems that created. And so this, I think, is what it's talking about here. Okay, when Antiochus came, he stopped the burnt offering and set up the abomination that makes desolate. That at some point he set up an idol to Zeus, an image of Zeus in the temple, and apparently offered a pig on the altar, okay, which would be abomination, right, to the Jews, because pigs were unclean animals, okay. And so it says, seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, okay, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And so this probably refers to the fact that maybe you've heard about this, but of course there were a number of Jews who were just like, we'll just kind of mix with the Greek culture and it'll be no big deal, okay? Obviously that was wrong, but that many Jews thought that, okay? But of course there were Jews who said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to break the covenant of God again. We're not going to violate and succumb to Greek and culture and idol worship, okay? And so there was this family. Okay, and this family had 3 sons, and the most famous son was Judas. Okay, and he became known as Judas Maccabees, and then him and his brothers together became known as the Maccabees. But Maccabee means hammer. Okay, so he's called Judas the Hammer. And when all this played out, and Antiochus is desecrating the temple, that's when the Jewish revolt happened under Judas Maccabees, okay? And so this led to actually lots of some brilliant military victories on the part of the Jews, and it actually gave the Jews for a brief time one of their brief times of actual freedom and liberation during this intervening period between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament, okay? And so we see the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, captivity and plunder. And when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join to themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it awaits the appointed time. And so these people are still living under the old covenant. This language here, refined, purified, made white, that's like language from the book of Revelation about the saints, okay? And so the Revelation picks up on this language. But what it is I think to generalize it, it's a reference to these people who stood firm against idolatry, right? But they suffered for it, right? Because Antiochus was an evil, wicked man. Okay? And so they stood firm and courageous, but they suffered for it. But despite their suffering refined them and purified them and made them white until the time of the end. And so that is that these people who remained faithful to God under the old covenant would be like the would be like the Old Testament saints, Daniel, David, Abraham and stuff. They would fall under these Old Testament saints who trusted God despite this strong temptation to idolatry because of the flattery of Antiochus, okay? But they suffered for it. And so I think it's a lesson to us, isn't it? That at times we will find ourselves, this has happened all throughout Christian history, and it is happening today all over the world, and it may happen right here in our country. Okay, that we will be faced with a decision, and there will be great societal pressure even to reject biblical truth, and we may end up suffering some for it. Okay, only the Lord knows. But the question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to just roll over and kind of fall into the flattery? The world can speak nice things. It can make you feel good about yourself and say, well, maybe it's not so bad. We can just kind of fudge here and we can kind of fudge there. Okay? But if you do that, you're giving in. But if we're wise, if we understand, stumble here I think refers to suffer. Okay? They're going to suffer. But they'll be refined, pure, made fine and white. Purified and made white. Okay. So what can we do? We can pray for wisdom, strength, and courage to not be deceived by the world. That's why we need to set our heart to understand like Daniel. Because if we're not wise, we're going to miss it. If we're not wise, we'll be deceived. Right? The devil's been at this a long time. He's brilliant. That's why so many people, I hate to say this, but that's why so many of young people who've been raised up in church are being deceived. And it's heartbreaking, but it's because we need more than just a little bit of Christianity sprinkled in our lives. We need solid, firm, deep wisdom from God so that we're not deceived by the world, so that we can have courage to stand when it's hard. Pray that God would use you to help people understand the times. That's one of the things that he mentioned there, and that could be us. The wise will help people understand, and maybe our generation, God's going to raise up some wise people, spiritually wise and discerning people who can say, hey, that's not quite right. And hey, this sounds good, but that's not quite right either. And let's look at God's word and to help people understand, because that's what we need. And we need to pray that we might be such people, and pray that God would help raise up such people to help us to think through these difficult things, so that we can remain firm and not be deceived by the world. And then finally here, pray for faithfulness through suffering, right? This is the call of every generation, every Christian generation, to remain faithful through suffering. The call to follow Christ is the call to take up your cross. Okay, if they maligned if they called the master of the house Beelzebul, Jesus said, how much more will they malign those of his household? Okay, but there is glory to it. There is a purification, a being made white and pure that happens when we remain faithful during trial. But if we're going to need God's help. So pray for it. Pray for yourself. Pray for your church. Pray for your family, your children, your grandchildren. And may God hear it. So go ahead and hit the pause button and pray through these things, and we'll finish up when you're done. All right, we got one more section we're going to go through. It's the following verses here from last time. It says, and the king shall do as he wills, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and divide the land for a price. So as we look at this, you should know that this is a very difficult part of the book of Daniel. Up till this point, the historical record aligns amazingly well with the details given here in the book of Daniel. I mean, it's incredible. It's remarkable. But many people note that when we get to verse 36, there seems to be kind of a departure from what can be shown from what we know about history during this time period. Okay? And some people, and it's hard to know for sure, but some people say that at the end of verse 35 it says, it references the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. And then if you look forward in a few verses in chapter 12 there, if you take a peek in chapter 12, you'll see it references actually the resurrection of the dead, which obviously from our perspective would seem way in the future. Okay, so some people suspect that there was a subtle shift in verse 36 from Antiochus IV to a future who many people identify as the Antichrist, okay, to a future person of whom Antiochus was a type or a picture of this end times being, but then the vision in Daniel switches to the far distant future where the description of Antiochus is now being transferred over to this end times Antichrist who exalts himself against God and who persecutes God's people and things like that. So that's one way to interpret it. It's hard to know for sure, but I think the principles that we can draw from this are still very important. So we see that Antiochus and maybe this end time Antichrist, we see their attitude, okay? He's going to be boastful, and he'll exalt himself above every god. He'll blaspheme against God. Of course, there's been many very important people throughout the last 2,000 years of history who probably would fit this bill. That's why, it's hard to know for sure who it's talking about, and maybe all of these things are pointers. I read one thing that somebody said that, he thinks Satan has an antichrist in every generation, okay, to be ready, to be ready for when the end comes or something like that. I mean, I don't know, but the thing is this is pointing to such a person who is doing these things, who sets himself up against God himself, that there is a decreed, there are things decreed that must take place concerning the world and God's people, okay? He shall magnify himself above all. There it is again. Okay, the God of fortresses. He shall honor the God of fortresses. So that may mean that he's going to be just a military person. Okay, primarily a military person. Okay, and it says here, those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and divide the land for a prize. And so he's going to be arrogant. He's going to be prideful. He's going to be boastful. He's going to be a flatterer. He's going to gather people to him by flattery and by gifts and by loading them with honor and positions of power and so on and so forth. And so, there are people throughout history, I'm sure, who would fit this bill. Antiochus kind of fits this bill, although some of the details are less clear. But the point is that we should always be on the lookout, right? We should always be on the lookout. And the thing is the reality is we might not know. Think about Hitler, think about Stalin, think about some of these very evil, wicked people in our, within our lifetimes, okay, some of our lifetimes. People who lived in those days probably thought with good reason that those were the Antichrist, okay? So the point is that, remember in 1 John it says there are many Antichrists. And so the point is that there are always going to be people who set themselves up against God. And maybe right at the very end there'll be one climactic person who fits this bill. Maybe that's what it's talking about. But regardless, we need to be ready for what's to come. We need to be ready that whether it's the very end or whether it's not, we need to be looking for those who would set themselves up against God, who will be arrogant and exalt themselves above all, who would win people over with flattery and gifts. And we should be ready to embrace what will come to us when we don't embrace that person, or when we don't embrace that leader, okay, or that party, or whatever it could be. Okay, we need to be ready to say, no, I'm going to stand for the truth. I'm going to stand for God, even when it costs me. And I think that's a lesson here from the book of Daniel. Okay, and so one thing that we can do to end on a positive note here is thank God that he is in control of all things and that the church will prevail. Remember, God's telling Daniel all this ahead of time. What does it mean? It means God's in control, right? That he is the one who is working all these things out. But we know that in the end, evil doesn't prevail. The Antichrist doesn't prevail. Antiochus didn't prevail. Satan is not going to prevail. The church will prevail. That's what Jesus said. Jesus said, I guarantee, I will make sure that this is going to happen. So nothing can stop it. And so, some of this talk sometimes frightens people, but you shouldn't be frightened. You should be hopeful. Because yes, it may get difficult, but hey, God's going to help us. God is going to make sure that his church is victorious. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. God's in control of all things. So remember that and thank him for it and ask him to help you trust in that. And then pray that we would remain faithful and loving to the end. All this made me think about what Jesus said, that at the end, he said, because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold, right? And so the more evil that we see out there and the more sin that we see out there, the more tempted that we are to what? To just say, well, they're treating me like that, so I'm going to treat them like that. They're talking to me like that, so I'm going to talk to them like that. And because there's more evil out there, our love will grow cold, and that's a great danger. It's a great danger, because if you repay evil with evil, you've lost. Okay? So I think what we really need in our generation is to pray that God would help us to remain faithful and loving to the end. And that won't be natural. It's not something you can muster up on your own. It will require supernatural grace from God, that when we are wronged, we will repay evil with good. We will repay disdain with kindness. It's not natural. It's supernatural. And that will be the testimony that we belong to God when we joyfully endure suffering, and when we bless those who persecute us. Okay? So think about that. Remember that, and pray that God would help us to do this to the end. So take some time, pray through this, and then pick back up with me when you're done. All right, so I hope that was helpful to you. I really do encourage you to maybe go find some resources, or get a study Bible, or maybe check out that website. I haven't checked it out personally. I hope that stuff's on there. I bet it is. But I think you'll find it very fascinating of the history that lies behind Daniel 11, and how accurate it was in all of its in its details. It's just really incredible. And so I encourage you to go check that out. I hope you're having a great week. If there's anything that we can do for you, or anything that we can be praying for you about, please don't hesitate to let us know. I hope to see you this Sunday as we worship King Jesus at 9:30 a.m. in person or online. And till then, I hope you have a great week. God bless you.